This week, gamers told us the most underrated consoles of all time. But are they really underrated? Hey Goose 18 kicks us off with their answer, quote, "The Wii needs more love and to be remade," end quote. And Goose, you know I'm gonna respect your personal opinion, but let's run some numbers and just see how underrated the Nintendo Wii is. Spoiler alert, it's not gonna pass the test. First of all, the Wii is in the top 10 best-selling video game consoles of all time. Number 7, in fact. With over 101 million units sold, this humble system outpaced a much more powerful and expensive PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, handily winning the generation. So then the question moves to what aspect of the Wii could be undervalued. But underrated by who? Kids absolutely adored the Wii, and we're just starting to see that nostalgia trickle into modern game design. Heck, it essentially introduced Blue Ocean strategy to console manufacturers, re-engaging lapsed game fans, and even introducing the elderly to Wii Sports and the cultural touchstone known as Wii Bowling. Quite literally everybody and their grandma loved the Nintendo Wii. So let's look at the hardware. It's certainly well designed, but Nintendo was looking to cut costs. And there's actually some areas like component cables that were actually better in the previous generation on the GameCube. The library includes everything from the spectacular Super Mario Galaxy and Galaxy 2, debatably the best 3D level design Nintendo has ever produced, to casual efforts like Wii Fit, which helped solidify the retail health technology industry in the West. Before the Apple Watch, there was the balance board. I'll concede the Virtual Console was much better here than the Wii U, but nearly every aspect of the Wii has received an abundance of praise. So underrated? I don't think so. But thank you for the answer. Up next is Tyler with Sega's swan song in the console market. Quote, "Dreamcast," end quote. And again, I hate to be such a stickler to the question, but can we really call the Dreamcast underrated? I'm a hardcore fan who kept all my games, consoles, and controllers, including buying fresh VMUs. But is it underrated? Well, it certainly points in that direction, as the Dreamcast released on 9/9/99 in North America, and ironically only sold about 9 million, with plenty of rumors of warehouses packed with unsold consoles. But the games, despite this, have lived on. Jet Set Radio, the funky cel-shaded mix of rollerblades and street art, has appeared on numerous platforms since the Dreamcast ended. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 endured so well after the fact that the next Sonic movie is covering Shadow the Hedgehog, who of course was introduced on the Dreamcast. And even the likes of Shenmue has seen HD re-releases and one extremely belated sequel. Now, the hardware did have some unique aspects like GCD ROMs and a built-in modem for online play, as well as the introduction of SegaNet, the first console online play service of its type, which introduced MMOs on the TV with Phantasy Star Online. It was groundbreaking, but it sold poorly, and its library has been in the conversation ever since it was discontinued. Not to mention everyone who makes video game media, myself included, loves the darn thing. So yeah, I'm a little surprised to say this, Tyler, but nah, Dreamcast didn't sell well and all. Culturally speaking, the Dreamcast has punched well above its sales figures, so I don't think we could really call it underrated. Up next is Stimco, who says, quote, "Coleco Vision. It's never even in the conversation anymore, and it was light years ahead of the competition," end quote. Well, Stimco, I'm gonna be showing my age, but Coleco Vision was before my time. And even while attempting to research video game history on the early internet, I was mostly pointed towards Atari consoles, which were then eclipsed by Nintendo and so forth. Heck, and Television and their passionate Blue Sky Rangers seemed to keep the flame alive longer than the poor old Coleco Vision. So what the heck happened? Well, kids, have a guess at what Coleco even stands for. Give up? Why, it was the Connecticut Leather Company. Yes, really. A leather company tried to get into the early 1980s video game fad. They not only wanted to sell their own hardware and software, they wanted to sell Ataris as well. That's right, an accessory allowed ColecoVision owners to play Atari 2600 games on their Coleco. A move so potentially extra legal, it resulted in an awkward partnership with Atari. Still, the console only sold around 2 million units, and its numerous and expensive expansions and accessories saw lower returns. But for any serious player back in the day, Coleco was considered the premium platform, far better than Atari, with provable success on the most complex games of the day, including the definitive home edition of Donkey Kong. Heck, some people still took this over the NES version. But here's the funny thing about being underrated. It's all about timing. 20 years ago, the Coleco and its Gen X fanbase were singing its praises in the media, much like the Dreamcast is represented today. But since then, the ColecoVision has rescinded back into obscurity, and its most notable appearance of the past several years was the suspect Coleco Chameleon, which of course failed to materialize. So you know what, Stimco? I'm gonna say we have our first underrated console of the day. Sure, the ColecoVision doesn't look like much these days, but spend 10 minutes into a game, and all that washes away for fuzzy pixels and audible bloops. Up next is Mason, who says, quote, Wii U is actually my favorite console actually. Still kind of mad they actually dumbed down Breath of the Wild due to recreating it for the Switch. Everyone knows the Sheikah Slate was designed to be used for all kinds of cool second screen things you can't do with a Switch. Probably the most amazing tech proof of concept on the gamepad was Lego City Undercover. Used that gamepad amazingly, but heck, I loved it in every game it got used uniquely. Some poor choices for Nintendo with this system. Too bad because it was the best. Still have mine, end quote. And John agrees, quote, honestly, if you ignore the game selection, the Wii U is better than the Switch, end quote. Well, that's an interesting perspective, and honestly, when it comes to the Wii U, we're probably too close to tell. Now, personally speaking, as someone who owned the console throughout its lifetime, it was not great. The Wii U failed to reach 14 million units sold, and it's not hard to see why. Whereas the Coleco Vision got you better versions of popular games, the Wii U either slapped a gimmick on the touchpad or didn't use it at all. But okay, let's entertain this point of the hardware being underrated, because in the intervening years between the Wii U's discontinuation, fans have continued to tinker with the system, creating some very cool homebrew projects. After all, the Wii U is about an Xbox 360 of power with a touchpad that can serve as a second screen. But the touchpad isn't rendering anything. The image is just being transmitted. And the image quality on the touchpad wasn't great when it first came out. And now in a world of OLED screens, this device practically looks washed out. Some folks enjoy the TV functionality, but that was quickly removed after only a couple of years. Yeah, I don't know, team. The Wii U is certainly interesting. It was certainly unique. It has features that you simply cannot find anywhere else. But there's probably a really good reason for that. They were bad ideas. Which sounds harsh, I know, but what ideas has Nintendo taken from the Wii U and applied it forward? I really can't think of any. And as for the library itself, well, it's awkward to say, but it's a bad console library. Bad versions of good games. Lesser versions which were later replaced by the Switch, such as Bayonetta 2, which was my personal favorite game of 2014, but the long droughts between releases made the Wii U impossible to defend. Who's up for some Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival? Of course, to each their own. But the public didn't care for the Wii U, and neither did a lot of players. Seems pretty fairly rated in my book. Check out our episode of Game Wreck all about the Wii U. It's not a pretty story. Up next is our very own Dominic, who says, quote, Vita, Wii U, Dreamcast, GameCube. I can't pick just one, LOL. All of these failed in spite of having some all-time great games, end quote. Well, we've already talked about the Dreamcast and the Wii U, so let's move over to the GameCube, which sold a much more impressive 21 million, but actually ended up in third place in the 6th generation, even behind the newcomer Microsoft and their Xbox console. And I'm certainly not going to be making any friends at the Mario Party, but I'm not quite sure we can call this one underrated either. As console games broke into the internet, the GameCube dipped a toe, but seemed far more interested in connectivity with the Game Boy Advance, and that insulated thinking would ultimately hurt them. Yes, Super Smash Bros. Melee will forever be a staple, but Super Mario Sunshine is far and away the worst 3D Mario. In fact, the Switch re-release had some players reconsidering those nostalgia goggles. The GameCube's high watermarks came from some pretty unexpected places, such as Metroid Prime, a first-person shooter take on a classic Nintendo franchise. Except, you had to use that controller. Yeah, if you go by online chatter, you might assume that the GameCube controller was enjoyed by all, but no, not even close. One shoulder button on one side? Sure, it was cool to see Link in Soul Calibur 2 and Little Mac in Fight Night Round 2, but these kidney-shaped buttons have never been duplicated elsewhere. And you know why? Because they're terribly restrictive to design. Now, if we're talking about a game like Killer 7 or Paper Mario Thousand Year Door that's designed with the ergonomic layout in mind, it works. But try landing a 900 in Tony Hawk using a GameCube pad, and frankly, it just doesn't feel good. I still own my Wii U, Wii, and GameCube. I'm not a hater. I just can't ignore the data. People didn't buy the GameCube even when it was only $100 because it didn't meet the standards of the day. But you know what, Dominic? I gotta agree with your first choice. The PlayStation Vita seemed like a curio when it was sunset. Who could imagine spending so much money on a handheld? But since then, we've seen the likes of the Nintendo Switch, Valve Steam Deck, and oodles of other pocket consoles. The Vita apparently only sold about 16 million units, which does push it ahead of other consoles mentioned here like the Wii U. Now, I want to caveat this by stating, it really only applies to the hardware. The software was, well, pretty much whatever was going on the PlayStation PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4, either through official ports or remote play. And now that Persona 4 Golden is finally on other platforms, there's really no reason to play a Vita, except it's really nice. While the Wii U broadcasted its gameplay from a bulky pad, the Vita was right there in your hands, with gorgeous rich color to match, and an OLED screen, but it's since been replaced by the much more capable portable PCs. Hardware-wise, I will totally agree, Dominic, the Vita was underrated. Alright, I suppose I should offer up my own answer for what I would qualify as an underrated console. And as I've mentioned, it's all about timing. Some consoles get reevaluated, some get forgotten, and then there's the TurboGrafx 16, aka the PC Engine, selling just under 8 million over the course of 7 years, much like the Coleco Vision. It's remarkable how forgotten this console has become. Except this time, there's no video game crash to explain its obscurity. Hardware-wise, this is a souped-up 8-bit platform, so you're getting all the zippy fun of the NES with much better graphics. I'd say square up bonk's revenge against any other platform at the time, and you'll walk away pleasantly surprised. It also had extremely bizarre oddities like JJ and Jeff, a localized version of a Japanese game about 2 TV hosts. Now it just looks like 2 grown men going nuts in pixels, and it rules. And then there's the accessory. The CD attachment that burned so many other tech companies actually paid off for the PC Engine, introducing Castlevania Rondo of Blood. Somehow, this game's legacy has continued unimpeded for 3 decades, but many can't recall what console it first appeared on. Go figure. And then there's the Turbo Express. That's right, they created a straight-up portable TurboGrafx. Now, mind you, it could only play Hue cards, slim cards which were actually far easier to store than bulky cartridges, but this was the at-home experience on the go, well before the Steam Deck, or the Switch, or the Vita, or even the Sega Nomad. Take your pick, Turbo Express, TurboGrafx CD, or the TurboGrafx 16. They're all woefully underrated in today's climate. Great consoles that sold okay, but by the turn of the century, parent company NEC was pulling the plug on all things video games. Without a vested interest to champion that history, it's largely been relegated to videos like this. Konami attempted to rectify this by producing the TurboGrafx 16 Mini in 2020, and unfortunately everyone was a little too preoccupied in 2020 to notice. Was Splatterhouse a great game? No, but it's a great experience that everyone should swing a machete at. Anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. How about letting us know what consoles you think are underrated in the comments below? Keep clicking around here on Game Rants, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.